Like as soon as I hit high school, 16, 17, 18, I'm like, okay, like the world is viewing me differently now that I'm falling into that category of woman rather than child. And I think when you add that layer of like, not only am I mixed in all these other cases, but now I'm a woman on top of that, that changes the way that like just being a woman, whether you are white, black, brown as a woman, changes how people perceive you and what people expect of you.
Right. Welcome to this episode of Brown Girl Problems. Today, we're meeting with Laila Hobbs, who is going to talk to us about her unique experience of being a biracial, bicultural, bi-religion, and her experience growing up in US and Canada. So it's a really, really fun conversation. Laila's the co-founder of Social Launch Labs. She has worked in many industries, including the film and social media industries, and she has a deep passion for storytelling. She's also incredible to talk to, so I cannot wait for you to hear this conversation. Well, welcome, Laila, to the podcast. You've heard in the background all the conversations, and that's kind of how you and I started talking, because I didn't know this, and I think people who are watching might not know this, but you also kind of identify as a brown girl.
Absolutely. I would say I am somewhat brown girl certified.
Yes. So tell me about your background. Tell me about what you kind of, I guess, identify as.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is one of the most interesting conversations that I have so regularly with people because I am mixed race and then I'm mixed religion and then also like mixed nationality.
Wow.
So there's a lot of things like that are mixed. So
Yeah.
if you come from a race perspective, my mom is brown.
Okay.
And my dad is white. From like a cultural perspective, my mom is Guyanese. Both of her parents are Guyanese, but originally from somewhere else because most people in Guyana are not originally from Guyana.
Right.
And then my dad was actually adopted. So he's white, but he was adopted into a mixed family in Jamaica.
Wow.
And so my dad grew up in Jamaica from the time he was like 6 months old. So very culturally, very Jamaican. And then like to make matters even more confusing, mom's Muslim, dad's Christian. I was born in the States. I grew up here in Canada.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So the whole thing is just really, really mixed up. So
You're
I
like
spent
Mr. Worldwide.
Mr. Worldwide, absolutely. Play the song. No. So I spent a lot of time growing up trying to figure out like what do I identify as? Like, do I have the right to call myself a brown girl?
Yeah.
That was a big one for sure.
And I mean, especially because your mom is brown and we grow up trying to basically use our mom as a role model. Not always, but most of the time. So that must have been hard for you because, I mean, as a biracial child, you don't really look fully like your mom.
No, I don't. I don't. I look very much like my mom, but I still experience like the experience of being like white passing.
Right.
Right. My mom doesn't experience that. And so I know that our experiences are very different in the way that people perceive us. Even if you put my mom and I side by side, people will be like, oh, you're obviously, everybody thinks we're sisters because my mom is drinking from the fountain of youth.
Wow.
And she looks super young.
Good for her.
Yeah, she is like in great shape. People think she's my sister. Like there's been times when we've gone to a bar and I've been like let through and she's been carded.
Wow.
Devastating.
She needs to drop her secrets.
She does. She does. Yeah. So that's been a very interesting experience, like relating to that. And then also because my dad is a white guy who grew up in like half of his family is black. He also had experienced that like my race doesn't really match my family's race.
Yeah.
So it was definitely interesting growing up and like seeing both of their perspectives and seeing the way that they move through the world.
So I know there's such a, like living in the diaspora, like we always say South Asian and we say brown, like interchangeably almost. Like I know I do, but I guess maybe that's just because I'm from South Asia. So how does that feel for you if someone says like, okay, you're brown, but not South Asian?
That feels very true.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, like I'm West Indian, I'm Guyanese, and I would consider myself Guyanese Jamaican from a cultural perspective for sure. So I've had people be like, where I referred to myself as brown, and they're like, oh no, you're not brown, you're Indian.
Oh.
And I'm like, I really am not. Like, how do I explain this more clearly? Like, I definitely would never consider myself like Southeast Asian.
Right.
But very much would still consider myself brown because that's the way that I'm perceived by other people in certain contexts, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's for many. I mean, I have friends that are Caribbean and they have the same thing where they're brown, but like, you know, we just say South Asian. And it's a blocker for them because they're like, where do I fit into that?
Yeah.
So I think if we add another layer of like you being biracial as well, plus all the other things you said, It's like even more, it's like, where do I fit in?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But it sounds like you found, like you seem very confident in your answers now. So I'm guessing that was a journey.
Most certainly. Like, I think when I went to high school was the first time I was kind of like, you know, you were meeting new people and the people are like, oh, where you're from. And it's like, how the hell do I answer that question simply? Right. And so then I ended up getting into all these like long backstories and how complicated the whole experience was. And, you know, how I act is definitely influenced by like being biracial, but also influenced by being like culturally Caribbean and then like religiously something else and then growing up somewhere else. So I learned throughout high school, all of these things are each individual components where, you know, most people, those four things like your race, your ethnicity, your religion, and where you grew up kind of all align.
Right.
But they are actually very, very different things. And so when you ask someone, where are you from? They're not asking that. They're asking one of those four pieces. For someone who is like white passing and mixed, I often find for me, it's like, why do you look the way that you look? Because you look kind of like off, like they can't categorize me. So they want to know how I categorize myself.
Yeah.
But then it also comes to like, when you ask about someone's religion, you know, are you Muslim or are you Christian? You know, and it's like, well, that's a complicated answer too. So I think growing up, one of the things that really helped me be comfortable in who I am is to really understand what each of those buckets meant and clearly defining where I sat in each of those buckets. I can't wrap them all together and put a nice bow on it, but I know exactly where I sit in each of those buckets. So that really, really helped.
That's a really good way of putting it. Like the four categories you mentioned, you're right. In our minds, I think it's just all one big thing. And then we can dissect it slowly, but that's not normally, you're right. Like everyone's just asking one of those things, but it's up to you to figure out which, like how you want to answer what they're asking.
Exactly. And I think like even when people ask, they don't know what they're asking.
Yeah, that's true.
Either, you know, they're looking for something, but they're not exactly sure what they're looking for. And then that generic question comes out of like, where are you from?
Yeah.
And it just, I dislike that question for many, many reasons. But I can't blame people for phrasing the question that way because in North American society in particular, we don't break those things up at all.
No, that's true. Like we do just kind of throw out an umbrella term. And I think, I mean, maybe hopefully the intention was nice and them
Mostly.
trying to, mostly. Can't say always, but like if I give people benefit of the doubt, like I hope the intention was nice that they were asking just to get to know you. But yeah, have you ever had someone like, I guess, have a negative reaction to the way that you described yourself or if you called yourself a brown girl and what they kind of
Oh, definitely.
Like oh, really?
Yeah, like I've had some people who are like, so before I did this, I worked like as a content creator. I posted a lot of content with my partner. And anytime that in those videos, he would either respond and be like, say something that like, I'm a brown girl, I would reference to myself that I'm a brown girl. The comment section would just be flooded with people saying, no, she's not, she's white. Or yes, she is, you know, she's Indian. And like in the comment section would always be a fight.
Wow.
So I can definitely see that there are people who have like very strong opinions about myself and like what I look like and what I identify as.
And how you should behave accordingly.
Exactly. Like I remember back when I was doing my TV show that I got into a lengthy debate with a white woman about whether or not I'm allowed to wear like a lehenga or a sari.
Wow. Okay. I was going to ask you about that. That's wild. So, I mean, I guess that's the whole cultural appropriation, appreciation conversation. So tell me about that experience because I want to know about that.
I think the thing that stood out to me most about that experience was I was so flabbergasted that somebody else who is not from the culture was telling me I couldn't do something from that culture. And I was like, if it had come from a brown person, I probably would have given it a little bit more credence.
That's fair.
And would have like reflected on that moment a little bit more about like, how do I do this in a way that, you know, is true to myself, but is also not negative to the culture. But I think in that moment, like, because it was a white person, I was very much like, oh,
yeah,
this is not the discussion you should be having.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think when we take up this mantle of like cultural appropriation, you have to listen to the voices of the people who are in the community. And I think sometimes that really gets lost. Like if you're trying to learn and if someone is like giving you feedback, what credence do they have to actually give you that feedback? Like think about that. You know? And I think we kind of lose that sometimes.
So it sounds like you stood your ground.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, as you should. So tell me for you, for you wearing a lehenga, wearing a sari, what is that? How do you feel in it, I guess?
I feel very comfortable Like for me, like I look at my mom's wedding pictures and my mom wore a lehenga in her wedding.
Okay.
You know, and so I wore a lehenga. I got married this summer and I wore a lehenga in my Muslim wedding.
Okay,
you know, and then
amazing.
I wore a dress like in my other wedding on the other side. And I think for me, it's like that is such a part of my culture and such a part of my identity. Like always growing up, like my mom's got hundreds of saris. And like anytime you'd go to an event at the mosque, you know, you're wearing some form of sari or some form of like cultural dressing.
Yeah.
Definitely mixing things up between like Middle Eastern garments and then, you know, Indian garments. But I also think being from the Caribbean, that's such a mixed place as well.
Yeah.
That cultures, food, clothing, that's all very Caribbean. And it's like the lines are much less defined because I'm a Caribbean person and what I can and can't do and like what is culturally appropriate for me.
Yeah, that's true. So for you, it is very much like, I don't even want to call it cultural appreciation in the sense because you are very much part of that culture.
Absolutely.
But then from the outside, like people are like, oh, why are you wearing that?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really, that's an interesting conversation to have with people. And like the question that I always ask is, if you are looking at me and asking that question of whether I'm culturally appropriating, like, why do I make you feel that way? You know, like, what are you thinking? What are the internal thoughts happening in your head that are reflecting on me and someone who like, I have the culture.
Yeah.
Why is that upsetting to you? Or why is that, you know, putting you in a different mood?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think a lot of times, especially the discourse on social media, I feel like everywhere I go, people are telling me what to think and people are telling me what's right or wrong. And then you get so used to that. So you have to like almost dissect it, take yourself out and be like, okay, what do I think about this? Where's my opinion? Because I'm just kind of following the masses and we forget. So yeah, if I saw you and I, you know, saw that you're wearing this to your Muslim wedding ceremony, I wouldn't think twice about it because I was like, obviously this means something. But yeah, for someone else to be like, oh, no, that's not allowed. That's bizarre to me that someone had that opinion.
You know, it's so interesting to me. Like, I think people think the world is so black and white.
Yeah.
But like, how many like mixed race kids do I know? How many like mixed culture kids do I know? Mixed religious kids do I know? I'm like, there are people fall in every single category that exists. And I think the thing that we don't do is we don't give grace.
Yeah.
You know, I think there are moments of teaching and I think there's moments of learning. And I do think that cultural appropriation is a thing and it can happen. But I don't think it happens as much as social media think it does. And I think the response that we need to have in those moments is compassion and care, not vilifying somebody. Because for the most part, in my experience, I have met very, very few people who are intentionally malicious, but I've met a lot of people who are just ignorant in the true sense of the word, like they just don't know.
Yeah.
And those people, if you go after them, they'll put their walls up, you know? So if you know, for that small percentage of people that are malicious, is it worth alienating all of the other people who could have a perspective change? I don't think it is. But that's social media discourse is a hot mess.
That's really well said though, because you're right. We have to show grace in order for them to learn. I've only met one person. And again, I don't think they were malicious. They were very ignorant. It was like maybe 10 years ago. And it was like Halloween. And she was just like, this girl that I used to work with, she was like, hey, like, do you have a sari I could borrow? And I was like, oh, for what? Like, are you going to a wedding? And she's like, no, I think I'm either going to like wear a sari for Halloween or I'm going to be like a go-go dancer. And I'm like, what? What? And so that like, but I think 10 years ago, I don't know if we had the term cultural appropriation or 11
I think it was just starting because of the Kardashians. I feel like the Kardashians, when they were doing the braided hair, like that's what, you know, if you think about like when it hit the masses, that's, for me, I can remember like 2016, that was my last year in high school.
Yeah.
That was when a lot of that terminology was coming up.
Yeah, I don't think it was around because I didn't have a word where I was like, I know this is wrong and I don't know the words to explain to you that this is disrespectful for you to have like, you know, the whole, my culture is not your costume. That's literally like the phrase wasn't there yet. But I was like, this is how I feel. So, but yeah, it was just ignorance. Like, I don't think she was trying to be like, oh, I'm gonna, like, she wasn't saying a joke or anything, but I will never forget that because I was like, what? No, you cannot borrow a sari to wear for Halloween so you can go clubbing. Like, this is not a thing.
That's not the vibe. No. We can do different things, like go to Party City and buy your, you know.
buy something else. So for you, I guess that's the main difference between the appreciation and the appropriation is, what did you say, the intent of it?
Yeah, I would say malicious intent. And I would also say, like, I would add to that as well, is even if the malicious intent is not there, but there is large financial gain, I think money gives power. And any time you get that sort of like power imbalance, you have to be very careful about how you're respecting other people's cultures. So if someone is going out and like selling a sari and rebranding it, I would be a little bit like, hey, who's profiting from this? And, you know, are they giving their dues back where they should?
Right.
All of this is very complicated. It's all on a base, like in this specific instance, what should be done. And I think when we slap like generic labels on it, that's when we all get ourselves into a lot of trouble because we don't give people that grace.
Yeah, I agree. I think now this summer, the discourse was like the Scandinavian look. I don't know if you've been following that. And like the dupattas that like there's.
Yes.
Yeah. And all the dresses that everyone wears. And like that originated from, as far as my research and my experience, I could be wrong, but that to me is very South Asian. It comes from, you know, having this piece of fabric that was used to cover and be like used as a thing of modesty. And don't get me wrong, it looks fantastic with the dresses. Like I agree, it looks great. But yeah, the companies, like you said, are not saying that this is inspired by this. They're not giving that credit. They're not giving the money back. They're, you know, it's just like, here, we have like rebranded something, called it something else. And now a bunch of people are gatekeeping it in a sense.
Yeah. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like when you look at art, and I am a firm believer that nobody comes up with fresh art. Like everybody is influenced by something. And art becomes richer when you can recognize the influences that go into creating a piece of fashion or a painting or a music video or a book. And so I think when we have this idea of like, oh, this is one thing and I'm not going to like call out where this comes from, I'm not going to recognize the historical context, you're actually diminishing the form of art as well. So I think there's an actual like economic and profitability perspective as well, where it's actually beneficial to really call it like, hey, we're doing this thing and this is a new trend. This is where it comes from. And here's how we were inspired. You know, and so if you think like from a business perspective, because that's always the thing, how does this make us money? How does this cost us money? There's absolute profit there for people to be more engaged with your product because it has historical context.
Yeah,
and because they're learning something.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's so much room. Whenever I see something like this, I'm like, wow, it would be such an easy fix. It would be so easy because the people who are asking for it are asking for so little. They're asking for just a little bit of recognition. So just to put that out there is all you have to do, but brands decide not to. And that's their own whatever reason. But like, they're actually not asking for a lot. No.
And that's the thing too, right? It's like, you know, we want an inch and they think we want a mile. I'm like, no, that's not the case.
Yeah, just give us some crumbs. But yeah, that's fair. And so you kind of talked about this, but like has there been, I guess, growing up, like people question your right to celebrate or your right to express your roots, whether that's like different holiday festivals, is that going to the mosque? Like, how has that shown up for you?
You know, as a kid, you never notice it. You know, you're a kid. You know, I'm surrounded by my family who, you know, if I was at the mosque, I was with my grandparents who are like obviously visibly like brown presenting. You know, I was with my mom, or, you know, we'd take my very white dad to the mosque and he would stand there and people would stare at my dad. But like, I never thought about it until I got older. And that was one of those things where I'm like, as soon as I hit high school, 16, 17, 18, I'm like, okay, like the world is viewing me differently now that I'm falling into that category of woman rather than child. And I think when you add that layer of like, not only am I mixed in all these other cases, but now I'm a woman on top of that, that changes the way that like just being a woman, whether you are white, black, brown as a woman, changes how people perceive you and what people expect of you.
Right.
And I think as soon as I stepped into like womanhood, then everybody was like, okay, you need to identify how you like go everywhere else, you know, and you need to like be very specific and you need to put yourself in a box and you need to do all these different things. And so it was only when I got to that age where thankfully I was like a very confident, fiery teenager. So I was very good at being like shutting down people and be like, no, like don't tell me how to live my life. Don't tell me how to identify. And honestly, I think because I had that fire and I had that confidence that my parents instilled, I never thought about it. You know, I'm sure people said things to me that were just blatantly inappropriate. And I was just like, not my problem. That's a you problem. And so I was so blessed to be raised with that kind of confidence to just like move through the world how I wanted to.
That's amazing. And that's so great that your parents instilled that. And they kind of, you know, indirectly or directly taught you that maybe you're going to get these comments, but don't let it affect you.
Well, it's interesting too, because when you have one parent who's like a person of color and one parent who's white, like you just see that struggle of the way that they were perceived themselves and how they interacted based on race, right? Like there were moments where my dad being white benefited him. Right. And that was very apparent growing up, where there was moments where my mom being brown was a negative for her, and she didn't get the promotion, or she didn't move forward in different ways. And so I think this idea of race, while I wasn't like super conscious that it could be a negative thing, I was super conscious that it did change the way that people perceived you and the way that you move through the world. And so I think I just had such everything was so mixed up. And I just keep coming back to like how lucky I am to be growing up in this blended pot, that I was just exposed to so much so quickly, so young, and both sides of the fences on almost everything.
Yeah.
So it was just like, all right, this is just life. Like, people say dumb stuff, people say good stuff. You can be a part of a community, you cannot be a part of a community. You just have to like decide.
And with that, now as an adult, I guess when you talked about stepping into womanhood, did you have to, was there pressure to almost be like that model minority? Even now, kind of, you're representing a group of potentially biracial children or women or men who are like, yeah, this is exactly how I feel. So is there pressure always to like present a certain way because you're representing so many different communities?
I think there definitely is. I wouldn't say there's necessarily even pressure to like represent the biracial side, but there's pressure to represent my brown side well.
Okay, fair.
Right?
Yeah.
So like I like hear from my mom like, oh, your grandparents came to this country with nothing.
Yeah.
They were immigrants and they struggled because of their skin color. Like, you have privileges that they don't screw it up.
Yeah.
And so I think growing up, not that it was ever a pressure, but it was an awareness that my parents were very good at being like, you need to be aware of who you represent and you need to act accordingly. I don't ever felt like they wanted to push me into like the model minority where like, oh, we're a better group of like minority than a different group.
Yeah.
But very much like people are not going to perceive you the same way they would perceive a white person, and they probably won't give you the breaks that they would give someone who's potentially white. And so I was very aware of that.
Yeah. So that immigrant conversation where it's like you really do have to keep the honor of the family, maintain and keep the legacy kind of going, because that's what everyone worked so hard for.
Exactly.
And we do. We have so much more privilege now in this generation than our previous generations ever did.
Oh, so much. And I was like so lucky to grow up with several great grandparents and like talk to them about what their experiences were. My great grandma got married at 14.
Oh my gosh.
In an arranged marriage.
Yeah.
And like 45 years, she was like, I'm going to get divorced from this guy, but I'm going to do it once all my kids are raised. They got divorced in their 60s.
Wow.
And I was like, how savage is that for my great grandma? Being like, okay, last kid's out of the house, boom, you're in the curb. Like, get out of here. I don't want to deal with you anymore. But she stayed in that marriage for 45 years because she didn't have the economic empowerment to be on her own.
Yeah.
Right? I don't have that problem.
Yes.
Right? So I'm like, I got to do what I have to do and like promote myself and also take care of myself financially to make sure that I don't ever end up like that, right? Because I have privileges that she doesn't.
Yeah.
So it was very, like, I liked talking to my great-grandparents about the experiences they had in life because it gave me perspective.
Yeah, of course. I mean, good for your great-grandma.
Yeah, she was
badass.
She was like one of the most badass people I have ever met. There are numerous stories. Like one time she was like 90 years old and my uncle was like, you probably doesn't want me to tell the story, but I'm going to tell it. My uncle was like cussing for some reason, and she washed his mouth out with soap. And he was like 25 when she did that.
Oh my God.
Like, damn, Graham.
She just does not hold back.
No, didn't hold back. Like, she'd tell you how it is. Like, if you did something dumb, you would know it. So she was, but that's like, they were very real, and I really appreciated that.
Yeah. That's incredible. I mean, thank you for sharing that about your grandma and great grandma and like, the legacy that kind of helps you live your life. It has those values. Yeah.
I'm like, I think, I talk about imposter syndrome and we hear a lot about imposter syndrome. And I've never experienced imposter syndrome because I look back and I'm like, my great grandma squatted in a rice paddy and had 14 babies. My grandma came to this country with nothing and built something. So I'm like, how can I have imposter syndrome? They did things that were infinitely harder. I'm exactly where I need to be, and anything that's hard I can do because they did something harder. And I'm like, I don't think people look back about who came before them enough. You can find yourself very rooted, very grounded, very confident if you see the people who came before you.
That's amazing. I need to like make that into a snippet and like post it every week because
hell yeah.
Because you're so right. I mean, there's so many mixed studies about imposter syndrome. I'm not going to go on a tangent about like women of color have it. Oh, actually they don't. They're being gaslit. So there's so much discourse, but yes, we do feel like imposters, but also society tells us that we're imposters. Society has told us we're not supposed to be where we've made it. So of course we're going to feel like we don't fit in. But looking back I've never really thought about that. That's a really cool way of processing imposter syndrome.
It's really helped me. I've like never felt any way about like, and because I was so young, like I did my first TV show when I was 14.
Wow.
And you know, so like on that first TV show, within the first couple of years, like I was interviewing like former Canadian prime ministers and meeting different people in politics and meeting different stars and like being in the room when we were debating with directors of, you know, the broadcast company if we're going to get another season and what that season is going to look like. And I felt like from a very young age, I was stepping into these rooms with like very like quote unquote big people. And I was like, I'm right here with these people. Like, what do you have to say that I can't match?
Wow.
You know, maybe you have a little bit of experience, which experience does go a long way.
Yeah.
But I can think, I have good logic, you know, even at 16. And I felt very confident voicing my opinions, which to this day, I still think I've got that big personality, very confident voicing my opinions. And so I learned very, very quickly, very, very young, between that combination of like being in those rooms at a young age, having my family, having the legacy, like you just have to move forward in life and you just have to keep going. These rooms are not as big as we think they are.
That's great advice. Honestly, because I have to remind myself of that. Less now, but earlier in my career, I definitely had to, where I had to be like, okay, like I'm going to this room, I have to speak, I'm presenting these group of white men. And I have to like, I know I'm right. Like I had to be like, I'm not saying anything wrong.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, I just need them to listen to me. And I would get so frustrated because either I'd mess up the pitch or I'd mess up the conversation or they wouldn't hear me out and some of it was on me. Some of it was like, you know, just my lack of confidence or unpreparedness. And some of them was just them shutting me out. But then something happens. Once you find your voice, you can't shut up.
You can't lose it.
Yeah, you can't lose it.
You can't lose it. It's like riding a bike.
Yeah, it's like once the fire is there, you're like, no, you're going to listen to me. I think I run out of patience at this point. I'm just like, shut up and listen to me. I know what I'm saying. So like once you find it, you can't lose it. And you found it just a decade earlier than I did, so which is fantastic.
I was very lucky. I had very supportive parents. I also think growing up an only child made a big difference because I didn't have like other kids. I was expected to interact with adults from a very young age.
Right.
And so you just like learn the adult cadence and you learn all like the professional jargon. And like I can remember being like 8 or 9 years old and I was with my grandparents and my grandparents used to sail. And so I was on like the docks at this like yacht club or whatever. It was like not a yacht, it was a sailboat, but I was there. And I remember it was right around the time that Obama was getting elected. And I was arguing with one of my grandparents' friends, who was like a 75-year-old man at the time. I was 8, about like his policies and his politics.
Wow.
And my grandma came over because she thought I was going to get steamrolled by this older guy. And the older guy was like, no, Mary, that's my grandma's name. She's fine. She's holding her own. And I was like, I absolutely am. Thank you very much.
That's amazing. I love that. And I think that you're right. Supportive parents, of course. You know what? It's something that I've noticed is like, I see these kids in our community that are very fiery at 5, 6 years old. And suddenly I see these young girls become people pleasers.
Yes.
And then they find their way back to that fire. I mean, I think it's incredible that you didn't have that same loop. I don't know how much of that I did. I have to reflect on that. But like, I see a lot of that where women are almost like, you have to be a people pleaser, you know, don't cause too much and then they find their way back. Did you see that somewhere else or like?
I think there's a level of people management that you need to have, right? People are going to perceive you in certain ways, and sometimes you can't break down the front door. Sometimes you have to be, you know, a little bit more sly in your approach to certain people. And I think the skill of people management, that's hugely important.
Yes.
But I think that gets conflated into people pleasing. And you start to people manage and go, oh, this is working really well. I'm just going to start people pleasing. And then that's when you tip the boat and you're no longer in control of that narrative and in that situation. So like my mom was always very specific of like, you need to be able to know how to interact with people, but you need to hold your own even if you're not voicing your own. You know, there are definitely moments where like playing the dumb woman has benefited me.
Absolutely.
You know, like if I need something and there's a guy there, oh dear, how will I ever get this done?
That's me practicing my feminism though. That's like me picking and choosing my gender roles, which is the point of feminism. So
exactly.
I
and
agree.
I'm like, in those moments, like that's a moment where I actually am in control of the power. But when you get stuck in that loop, that's when you lose your power. And that's when you run into a lot of issues.
So what would you say to someone who might be listening who is stuck in that loop, who is people pleasing? Maybe they know they're people pleasing and they can't get out of it. Sorry.
That is so tough, because I actually don't think most people pleasers know they're people pleasing until the end of that journey for them.
Yeah.
So my number one question is always like, are you in control of that situation? Are you acting this way to elicit a very specific response from that person? And is that person responding the way that you want them to? Mm-hmm. If they're not, you gotta adjust. Mm-hmm. This is not working out for you. Mm-hmm. But if you're getting what you want out of that interaction, you're being intentional with it, then you're the one in control. You're the one who has the power. Don't stress about it.
I agree. I feel like a lot of times it is just to like not rock the boat and just like, you know, go with the flow. But yeah, if like the end result is what you wanted and you just chose the peaceful way, okay, great.
Yeah, that's reasonable people management.
Yeah, exactly. I like that, people management. But if you are not getting what you want and every day you come home and you're like, oh, I didn't stand up for myself, that's when you're like, you really have to reflect and be like, this is not working for me. I'm not happy. I don't know if the other person is. I'm spending all my time, you know, focusing on other people. I don't really know how they feel. We never know how someone else feels.
No.
So yeah, we're just wasting energy, which is unfortunate.
Yeah, protecting your energy is so important.
Yeah. Okay. That's good advice though. So now that you're kind of, I guess, on this journey, you kind of know how you identify. I want to ask, you have a white partner.
I do.
How does that change things in terms of how you identify, and maybe in like, I don't know, the religion you practice, or in the future if you do have children?
I grew up in a very blended family, so I'm very confident that blended families can produce kids who turn out well.
Yeah.
Very confident in that statement. Yeah. So I think when it comes to like what that experience will be like for our kids, I'm not concerned. You know, they're going to know they come from very different backgrounds. Mm-hmm. The one good thing about my partner is, even though his family is white, his father's side were Austrian. Mm-hmm. And so they went through an immigrant experience as well.
Right.
Right. They didn't speak the language. They spoke German. They had an accent. So there was a level of understanding about what our grandparents went through that was actually more aligned than I think if he was like 100% Canadian. Mm-hmm. So we had ground to meet on right off the bat. I definitely think blending cultures and like learning how to interact with each other's cultures, there were definitely some learning curves there.
Yeah.
You know, and like even just trying to get him to understand what my background was, how all the puzzle pieces fit together, like race, religion, ethnicity, like country of origin, all that kind of stuff. Mm. That took a while. For I think like the first 3 months we started dating, he actually thought I was white and was thoroughly confused when he met my family.
Yeah.
So...
And he was just like, what is happening?
What is happening? You've got a brown mom, your white dad speaking with a Jamaican accent. Yeah. Like, what?
Yeah.
What's going on here? So there's definitely been some learning curves, but if there's one thing that I've learned, like I was the first person of color to come into his family in like a partner way.
Right.
And his family took it well.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there were moments where there were speed bumps, but for the most part, they were curious. They were open. They were never malicious. And it just taught me, I'm like I grew up in the Tumblr day and age where people could be like very fiery and like protect my own, and everybody like who's not brown doesn't understand it, and like all these white people are going to be angry and, you know, mean and all these things. And I'm like, that's not the case. Mm-hmm. Like for the most part, people are good people. You know, people are nice. They want to be respectful. They want to do well. Right. And I think so that was a really big shift for me. Not that I ever thought like, oh, white people, terrible, but definitely like it lowered my guard, because it definitely, I was like, okay, there are moments malicious, but for the most part, it's just like, do you know?
Yeah.
Do you know how to interact appropriately? Do you know what's right? Do you know what's wrong? Do you know what's, you know, disrespectful or not? And when you sit there and you have those moments where people are open to that education, you're not vilifying anybody. Change happens so unbelievably quickly. Mm-hmm. So quickly.
Yeah, once you both are meeting at a place with empathy and grace and listening. And for your mom, I guess, kind of switching gears, when she joined your dad's family, but I guess he's adopted, because I want to understand from her coming as a brown woman into a mixed family, how that was for her, I guess.
I feel like it was there's drama with any relationship.
Okay.
But because my dad's family was Jamaican, like Caribbean people are Caribbean people, whether you're Jamaican or you're Guyanese or you're Barbados or you're Trinidadian. So like it was very much like, oh, it's just like another Caribbean family, you know? So I didn't feel like there was as much of like a culture shock there. Like my dad understood a lot of things about the culture.
Yeah, I guess that's true.
My dad ate all the food.
Yeah.
You know, my dad cooked all the food. So there was like those cultural speed bumps just weren't there. Just because everybody kind of knew everybody. Like my dad's best friend is an Indian Jamaican guy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it was like preordained.
Yeah.
No confusion there. Everything worked out really well. You know, my dad goes to the mosque, you know, so it's like, it was very, I feel like what was harder for my parents was like figuring out how to raise a mixed race child and like how to make sure that I was still, because my dad was raised in Jamaica, so he didn't know how I would turn out being raised in Canada. Right. And so I think my parents' biggest things were like, you cannot lose your roots. And that's what they were more focused and more worried about. Whereas for me, it's more like there's an education piece that my parents didn't have to experience.
Yeah. That's an interesting way of looking at it. And yeah, I mean, like with your partner being white, but also descending from immigrants, that definitely does give you some, I just like empathy, I guess, for each other's experiences.
There's so many shared experiences. Like if you take, my partner's name is Brett, if you take his dad and you take my mom, who grew up to immigrant parents, they have a lot of similar experiences.
Yeah.
Maybe not about race, but definitely about like being an outsider, like coming with no money, you know, having people bet against you. Those are very common experiences that both of them share. And I think like when you get, like, I think we get so stuck in like the race piece, you lose the other areas of connection.
That's
that
true.
You can really dive into, right? You can't stop at race. That's a part of it for sure.
Yeah.
But there's so much more you can connect on.
That's so true, because like instantly my mind also went to, but the race is different, the gender is different, so the experiences will be different. But you're right, that's just the way, I guess, we're trained to look at that. But yeah, there's so much that's in common, that there's so much that is a shared experience because of their journeys.
And they're so alike.
Yeah.
I would say Brett's dad and my mom, there's aspects of their personality that are so alike. I'm like, oh my God, you guys are the same person.
It's an added bonus. That's nice.
Yeah. And I'm like, but it's like so many of these experiences, like their view on the world, the way that they think, like the pressures that they put, the expectations that they had were so aligned. So like when I met Brett, I was like, oh, there's so many things we can talk about. There's so many things that I've experienced this as a second gen. You've experienced that as a second gen. Those experiences are aligned.
Yeah.
Right? So absolutely differences, gender, race, but so much more in common.
Yeah.
And honestly, like if I was to moan and groan about politics for one moment, I think losing the ability to see common ground is absolutely what has screwed us in the last 20 years.
I will agree. Absolutely. I was like ranting to myself this morning actually about the fact that like, actually, I'm going to cut this off. This is just me ranting.
Okay.
Because I was like at a conference and we're talking about all these immigration policies and everything. And yeah, like it's like we were within this conference of people who are, a lot of them were people of color. We're talking about the different experiences and how immigrants who are coming from Somalia are having a very different experience than immigrants from Ukraine.
Oh, damn, yeah.
Right. And it's like, we're talking about that and we're like that. I'm like, okay, there's the race part there. But apart from that, even people from South Asia who are saying there's too many immigrants coming from Somalia, there's too many immigrants from Syria, but immigrants from India are allowed. I'm like, why are we all missing the fact that we're all immigrants? We're all searching for a better life.
Yeah, we're
like
all here for the same reasons.
Yeah.
You know, and like it's so, I think like when you look back at immigration in like the 70s in Canada, there were so few immigrants that I feel like regardless of race, they were kind of all treated the same way, but like had similar experiences. Yeah. Right. But I feel like now like Canada is such a multicultural place. There are, you know, when you land in Canada, you can find a community that you are from here in Canada.
Absolutely.
Right? And then that's when you start to get like communities pointing fingers at each other. I'm like, this is not what we should be doing. I mean, we can be more productive if we work together.
Yeah, we should have communities for the food.
Exactly.
That's the only reason why I want it is for the food. I'm like, this is the neighborhood for the best food, for the best doubles, or for the best whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm like, oh my God. And when you talk about like introducing cultures to new people, start with the food. Yeah. That is the easiest way to introduce culture to somebody else.
That's true. Food brings us all together.
It really does.
Okay. Well, I don't want to end this conversation, but for time I have to. So then I have one last question for you.
Yeah.
which is, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Listen to your intuition. I have consistently been smarter than I've given myself credit for. And I've given myself a lot of credit for being smart. And I think, like, as women, as people, we know what's right for us. Do not listen to the noise that's around you. Like, there's making smart decisions, which you should make decisions that are smart, but listen to the direction that you want to go. Right. And so that, I think that's where, like, when I did struggle, it was always because I was listening to, like, outside influences and going off the path that I knew was right for me.
Yeah.
Because of fear. And I'm like, fear exists, but there's zero, you can't ever get a situation where there's zero risk. Like, trust your gut, trust your intuition, stick to the plan long enough for the plan to work.
That's a good part B.
Part B, stick to the plan long enough that it'll work, and it all does work out in the end.
Yeah. I love that. I'm like, I think I needed to hear that today.
Stick to the plan, Rooney. It will work out.
Yes. Okay. Well, this was a fantastic conversation. I speak to so many people, even in my friend group or, you know, even online, about people who don't know how to identify, who don't know what they should, you know, they're being told what to say about themselves. They're not trying to figure it out, or they feel like, what am I supposed to say? What's right or wrong? And I feel like you've helped so many people because of how strongly you feel about it and how there's no shame in the way you're presenting, and you own your roots and you own, you know, your legacy and your heritage, like we talked about, but you're still very much you. And that's very important. It's like, I'm also still this Canadian person who grew up here and I have all these different things, but I'm not afraid of my heritage, even though I might not look exactly like everyone else, which is fantastic.
It is. It is. And I think, like, as the world is going to continue to change faster and faster every year. It is going to become easier and easier to lose ourselves. You know, so it's self-reflection is something that everybody needs to participate in most of the time.
Yeah. Don't over-reflect, but reflect.
Don't over-reflect. Yeah. Reflect to the point where, like, okay, I've got my answer. I've got my, you know, my foundation. Now it's time to move forward.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much again. This was lovely. The best conversation ever. And damn it, I always forget how to end it. I don't know how to end it. But yeah, it was great chatting with you. This is
high five.
Yeah. Woo! Did it.